the new Digital Research Infrastructure Organization, or NDRIO. And we are looking forward to hearing from her and hearing your questions at the end. So be sure to think of questions, and if you do have questions, pop them into the chat or raise your hand and we'll deal with them at the end. But if you want to put questions in as placeholders while Ghilaine is presenting, we'll be glad to gather those up throughout the presentation. So over to you, Ghilaine.
Bonjour, c'est un plaisir de vous rencontrer. No, I just did the presentation in French, so I'm still in French mode, but I'm going to switch to English for this one.
And you can share your screen now as well.
And I'll be sharing the presentation with you. If I can get it, here it is. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you this afternoon on the new organization, the new Digital Research Infrastructure Organization that we're currently putting in place. So in terms of background, to give you a bit of history, some of you probably already heard those presentations and know about this, but still for the others, I'll recap a bit. So the reflection around the ecosystem, the digital infrastructure was started. At the first time, there was a presentation done in 2009, and then more regularly discussed starting in 2011. Then the Leadership Council was put in place to pursue more detailed work at the request of the Minister of Science at the time. In 2017, the LCDRI prepared position papers, one on the ARC side of things, the other one on data management, and the third one on the organization. Following those three position paper, the minister did a call for proposals where they were following one of the recommendations of the organization position paper to create a new organization that would be in charge of the ARC, the data management, and the research software domains. So that call was answered, and after that, the ministry decided to go ahead with putting in place this new organization. But always we in all those years, because it's been nearly 10 years of discussions to put this in place, we were guided by certain numbers of principles, and those were kind of overarching purposes that were identified, and you'll see later on that we also have some guiding principles in regards to our activities within the NDRIO. But the idea was to attract and retain globally competitive talent. As we know, research is more and more an international activity. There are facilities around the world. People participate to research group that can be located anywhere on the planet. So if we want research to happen in Canada and benefit the Canadian population and country, we need to be able to attract those talents and keep them here. So there's this global research excellence, increase the potential for game-changing research, maintain our Canadian advantage in data analytics, accelerate innovation and commercialization in the private sector, enable better and more efficient public service delivery and decisions, and maximize the public investment in research. So there are four elements in the DRI: advanced research computing, the ARC side, data management, research software, and of course the digital network that permits us to communicate around the world, transfer data, and exchange and work in a more and more decentralized environment. So those four elements of the DRI are supported by cybersecurity and highly qualified personnel. So cybersecurity is kind of an overarching component of what we're going to do, and has to we cannot see it as another pillar because it's transversal. It touches all the different pillars that we've talked about. And of course, the personnel that is currently supporting those four pillars across Canada. We also need to take care that putting in place this new organization is not done in a way that would impede in any way keeping those resources and continuing benefiting from their expertise. So when I said establish their new DRI strategy and following the call for the creation of the new organization in NDRIO, they set aside an amount of $375 million on the 5-year funding to establish that organization. So those 5 years end March 31st, 2024. So we'll see that there's different milestones in the planning that we will be doing that take into account those different dates in terms of the funding model. So the new organization is going to invest in ARC, DM, and RS. So you must see the new organization as a funding organization. So currently, those pillars are mostly funded on the Canadian level by CFI through 2 programs, one to finance infrastructure and the other one to finance support, the MSI program. Those 2 programs are going to be replaced by the funding that will come to NDRIO. So NDRIO will be a funding agency, a bit like CFI is one. CFI will retain, however, the portion around new innovative technology. So something that's really completely new in terms of infrastructure or very dedicated disciplinary-based infrastructure will continue to be funded by CFI, but will be hosted by the new organization. So there's a new collaborative model that has to be put in place between CFI and NDRIO to make sure that component of the financing of the DRI infrastructure is done in an harmonious way as much as possible. And there's a Canary that will continue to lead the area of the digital network and research and for research and education. So the networking part of Canary's activities will remain in Canary, but the they have programs around data management with RDC and RDM, and also on the research software side will be transitioned to NDRIO in the next few years. So this is the current landscape. So you see different organizations that are currently supporting those different pillars. It's not the most efficient way of doing things, especially when we look at it from a funding perspective. The new model that we're putting in place is this. It's a bit clearer. So as I said, Canary is still keeping the network component of the different pillars that support DRI, and the new organization will merge the data management, research software, and advanced research computing within one organization, and the funding will flow directly to the new organization from the Ministry, the Government of Canada. So in terms of priorities, we have, as I said a bit earlier, some guiding principles. We have worked with the stakeholders to get feedback in terms of the membership and governance model that we have put in place in our member meeting in March. So that was done in December 2019. And we also articulated some guiding principles in terms of anchoring the different activities that we do. We want it to be researcher-centric. We want it to be service-oriented. We want it to be accountable and transparent. We're striving for excellence, and we want it to be collaborative. So those are the things that are going to orient the way that we're going to put in place the new service.
Hi, Ghilaine. We seem to have lost your audio. Do you want to try unplugging maybe and replugging in or something? Hi, Ghilaine.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you now. You're able to share your screen again.
Okay. So, sorry about that. Can you tell me where you were when you lost me in the microphone so I can go back to that slide?
I believe it was one before this one.
Okay. So I don't know what you heard or not on that page, but I'll skip faster on it. So we did intensive consultations in the fall to define a new membership and governance model in December. That was made public at that time. That and all the documents that are produced by NDRIO are available on our website. We try to be as open as possible and everything is there. And we try also to be perfectly bilingual and promote documents in English and in French. So in this, we articulated guiding principles that will really anchor the different activities that we are making, planning, and executing now and in the future. So researcher-centric, service-oriented. This one is an important one because the model is switching. When we think about service delivery and funding, we're really going to a service-based model, contrarily to the current model, which is more of a project-based model. So that will have an impact in the future. I want to be accountable and transparent. As I said, everything we do is available on our website. You can go and look at it. We're striving for excellence, and we want to be collaborative. There's a bit of a paradox here when we talk about collaborative, in the sense that consulting, I think, brings better value in what we produce, and is more useful and attuned to the reality of the ecosystem if we consult. But at the same time, it takes time. So sometimes there's a bit of a tension between having fast delivery and having well-informed delivery of different services or documents or whatever we're working on. So we need to kind of resist to that pressure of doing things very, very fast, and making sure that we do work in collaboration, and that we do take into account the feedback of the environment in which we work. So our priorities, the first stream is around building the organization itself. So we finalized the governance and organizational structure. We will be establishing the Researcher Council. We want to articulate the strategic plan, including a national vision and strategy for growth in our SNDM based on the user need assessment. So this is the core of what we will be doing in the next year. We anticipate that there may be some delays in our planning because of COVID-19. Currently, we're able to work very well, each one in our house with the different tools that are available to us. But consultation, although some of it can be done by Zoom meetings like today, or other technologies that we may use, but there is a point where you do need to have those face-to-face meetings to review the different plans that are being prepared. So this, of course, is going to be limited at this point. Pretty much everyone is in lockdown. So depending on when that lockdown ends, it may have some impact into doing the strategic plan, because we feel that we cannot skip on the consultation part to respect a timeline. So we'll see if we need to prolong that portion of our activities a bit to make sure that we do a proper consultation. Establish backroom finance, administrative functions, etc., management process. Yeah, of course, that has to be done. Define the NDRIO brand and establish communication mechanisms. Well, we don't want to be named a new organization longer than necessary, so there will be an activity to change the name of the organization to a more permanent one. Second stream of work is building the new service delivery model. I alluded to that a bit when I presented the kind of the overarching context. So we're moving to a new service delivery model, and this will have to be done in collaboration with regions, host sites, and other DRI partners to switch, as I said, to that model that currently is really like calls, proposals, and allocation on a project base mainly, to a more service-based approach. So we have to work with our different partners into defining that new delivery and how it's going to happen, and how funding is going to flow from the ministry to NDRIO to the different groups that currently provide services, whether it's the 32 institutions that are seconding personnel to support the DRI environment, or the 5 host sites, or the regions, the 4 regions, or central compute, currently provided by Central Compute Canada and by Canary through their data management and research software programs. So this is also a major initiative that will require a lot of consultation and work in collaboration with our different partners. We wanted to launch a kind of a pilot project program in May. That will be delayed to the fall. So the idea here was to do a small call for initiatives that would permit us to pilot or test either new infrastructure or new services or new software, or in a way that would be aligned to what we see emerge as new needs through the need assessment and the strategic planning. So of course, because of the context that we're in, this cannot be done at this time and will be pushed to the fall. We want to safeguard the DRI resources through enhanced investment and coordination in cybersecurity. One thing we have in our current agreement with ISED is that we need to deliver a cybersecurity framework for March 2021. Currently, Compute Canada is leading a reflection around that with the regions and the host sites. Canary is also involved in looking at it with the ORANs and the institutions on the networking side. We'll all work together to kind of bring that together and propose a kind of a framework that would apply to all the different pillars in the DRI ecosystem, so that we have something that's coherent and works well and is transversal in this application. And we will also develop a joint DRI ecosystem plan with Canary to make sure that even though each of the organization will have their own strategic plan and their own agreements with ISED, we want this to be coordinated and make sure that we have a transversal view across networking, ARC, DM, and RS, so that we do not have a kind of a pillar approach, but a more transversal approach, and that we make sure that we are coordinating our activities and our planning between both organizations. Third stream, coordinate transition activities. So this is also an important group of activities that we need to do in the following, this year and ending next year. So in terms of programs and funding, the infrastructure program currently ends March 31st, 2021. The MSI program that funds resources and support of that ecosystem is ending in March 31st, 2022. So at that point, all resources that are currently supporting the DRI ecosystem will have been transferred to NDRIO, and starting on April 1st, 2022, all the funding around infrastructure and support will be managed by the new organization. So for this to happen, we need to do a real good planning around that transition, making sure that we're providing for continuity of service, that researchers do not experiment any lessening in the quality of the service that are offered to them. So there needs to be, very careful planning, change management, making sure everybody is informed and know what's happening and how it will happen. So that the planning is going to start like imminently. We already are having preliminary discussions to establish the current state, and we will start the discussion in the next few weeks on where we want to go. So there's going to be that kind of transition, high-level definition of what is going to be the desired state. Where are we going, and how are we going to function in terms of an organization, and how do we make sure that the transfer of the different blocks of activities that are currently in Canary and in Compute Canada transition seamlessly into the new organization. So we need to do transition plans. So this year is mostly transition plan. The plan will have to be delivered to ISED in January 2021. So that planning with mainly with Canary and with Compute Canada is happening currently. And we will coordinate transition activities across organization at the management and governance level. So here we're at the planning phase. The year 21-22 will be really the transition itself, the displacement of the resources and responsibility from one organization to the other, so that on March 31st, 2022, we have a full completed transition transfer to NDRIO. So we need to be also working on the development of change management strategy, professional development plans, make sure that you know, we're not only thinking of legal or operational or financial aspect, although we do need to look at those, but we're also considering the resources and making sure that they're kind of merged into this new organization in a as seamless way as possible. And finally, it's the last one, but it's funny because it's the one that happens the first, is the complete transition of DM Carl Portage. So the funding for Carl Portage ends in September 30th, 2020. So they're on a different schedules than the other programs that we've talked about. So we're finalizing the agreement with Carl that will bridge the funding from October 1st, 2020 to March 31st, 2021. After that, you know, we will be using the year also to transition so that Portage is fully integrated into the new organization starting on April 1st, 2021. So they will be the first that will be transitioned, and just by happenstance of funding agreements that end earlier than the other ones. But that is nearly finished in terms of this year. And we will complete for next year, during the year, working with the people from Carl and Portage to do the final complete integration for March 31st, 2021. Finally, core to all streams, stakeholder engagement. As we said, we want this to be very collaborative, making sure that we consult, that we do have strong input from the researchers in kind of making sure that we do keep that focus on how are we delivering services to them, because that's the objective, that's the mission. We do need to have that researcher, partner, stakeholder engagement and communication focus, and put in place the mechanisms that will support that in the best possible way. So the governance of the new organization. So currently we have a first board, full board. We had an applicant board before that, but since March, the new board has been elected. There's a board chair, 14 members, directors, we should say, primary members. So here, in terms of language, I think I'll revise this slide, because when we talk about the 14-member board of directors, we should be talking about 14 directors in the board, because the members, term members in the context of the governance has a different signification. We are really talking about the organizations that are the voting members or non-voting members of NDRIO. We're a nonprofit, membership-based organization. So that's what we mean when we talk about members. So here I find it's a bit of a confusion, but okay. And finally, the Researcher Council, which is an integral part of the governance that we're putting in place. So this is the list of the members of the board of directors. Myself, I keep saying member, but I shouldn't. So I won't, of course, list them all, but you may consult that list. It's pretty an impressive board, where we had to take into account many criteria. Some of them required by ISET, mainly around the notion of independent. ISET wants the board to be composed of a majority of independent member and of an independent chair. I know for some people, when we say independent members, they are directors, they think that that means people from the private sector. It doesn't. It just means people that are not in a position to benefit directly from the funding that will come from NDRIO. The non-independent member will have to abide by different rules to respect, conflict of interest preoccupations, but having a majority on the board that are independent means that there is an oversight by the independent members to make sure that the dependent members or directors are not using the board to promote self-interest. So as I said, I think you should be looking at that list. It's a really good board. The other criteria that we had in that matrix of competencies that we established to constitute that new board: equity on the gender side, participation of First Nation, representation of the different regions in Canada, whether it's West, Central, or East, a representation of the different pillars that we're covering, a variety of representation from a disciplinary perspective. So it's like a Rubik cube in many dimensions where, I think it's pretty good. Some people would say, and I agree, that there's not enough representation from the French and Quebec community, but we have to see this board as something that's living and that's going to evolve in time. The terms are limited in time. Somebody cannot stay on the board forever, so people will be replaced, and we will try to correct some of those areas where we could be more representative than we currently are. But I think it's a pretty good effort, and the results are quite impressive, frankly. It's a very nice group of people. On the membership side, we have, as of February, we had 136 members, 51 primary voting members, and 85 associate non-voting members. So the primary members are post-secondary institutions, research hospitals, and or affiliated institutes eligible for TriCouncil grants. Associated non-voting members include post-secondary institutions that choose not to be voting members and organizations with responsibilities that relate to the national DRI ecosystem. You could think of institutions like associations like Carl, Cuccio, and other, fit within that second definition. Membership is not required to access NDRIO programs, which will be available to the eligible researchers and research institutions across Canada. This is a very important point, cannot be stated enough. There is absolutely no link on the ability for a researcher to access the services that will be delivered by NDRIO and the fact that their institution is a member or not. Researcher Council. So this is a priority activity for the new board. The process will be led by a researcher, Dr. Guillaume Roquet, who was a member of the applicant board and has accepted to co-chair the new Researcher Council. He will create a small group, like imminently, composed of himself, a member of the board, and 3 researchers coming from each of the domains of the TriCouncil, to prepare the terms of reference of the new Researcher Council that will be presented to the AGM in September for approval, and from there they will constitute the new Researcher Council. And here, like with the board, there will be a competency matrix to make sure that it is representative of the different pillars, it is representative of the different research domains, disciplines, I mean, when I say domains in this instance. Also from a gender perspective, inclusion of First Nation, making sure also that we have not only researchers that are at the top of their career, but also new researchers that are starting their career and that have a specific perspective that we want to see reflected in the work of the Researcher Council. So the Researcher Council will be mainly in charge of overseeing everything around user need assessment and strategic planning. So NDRIO is dedicated to promoting Canada as a global leader in digital research infrastructure. That's what we want to do, and that's our role. And for more information, I really invite you to go and visit the engagedri.ca website, where tons of information are available and are available in French and in English for anybody who's interested in consulting them. You can also communicate with George Ross, who's our Executive Director. The address, his email address is there. You could also, of course, communicate with me to ask any question that you would have following this presentation. So Jeff, I don't know if there are questions that people have sent through the chat.
We haven't seen any yet here that I've seen anyway. I do encourage you all, if you've got questions, to pose them to Ghilaine. Ghilaine has as good an insight into what's happening at NDRIO as anyone, and would be well positioned to answer questions on the future of all of the components of the new organization, but in particular, perhaps the data management component. I think it's fair for me to say that Ghilaine and Mark Leggett and me and Shahira Kerr, who some of you know from UVic and formerly from Portage, will be working on strategic planning information to inform the board as they develop a strategic plan in the coming months. So there'll be some work happening in that space. Are there any questions about what Ghilaine has presented here today? All right, there's a question that's come in. To what extent are the TriCouncil agencies involved in the work of the new organization?
They're very involved. Of course, there's a certain focus on CFI because of the funding transition from them to us, and also to make sure that we harmonized our activities with their funding programs that will remain around innovative proposals. But also with TriCouncil, we've been having discussions. If we think about the data management file, for example, around the new policies that will come out in terms of data conservation, that will be gradually implemented through the requirements of TriCouncil in terms of funding research projects. So that and other areas are areas where we will be collaborating with them extensively. You have to see that the way that the new organization is put in place, we are a funding agency. So we will be discussing with them and engaging with them in the same way that currently CFI does with TriCouncil. So the same logic of collaboration will remain.
Okay, thank you, Ghilaine. Another question came in that comments that you mentioned international a few times. What might the nature of this interface or maybe this interaction look like on the international front?
I think that there's many areas there. Most, I'd say, obvious one at this point is NDRIO participating in international associations and working groups in the same way as Portage has done in the past, or Carl or RDC has done in the past. So that certainly will have to be maintained. But there's also maybe reflection to be started around sharing also resources and capacity, a bit like it's done in certain discipline where if we think, for example, of astrophysicists, where the observatories are built by many countries and shared by the researchers of those countries as a resources. I think that there may be some interest and some value in starting to look if there are not some partnerships that could be established around sharing the development of certain services that could be offered through either in partnership with the United States or with Australia or UK or EU that have models that could be compatible with our own. And certainly from an international benchmarking approach of looking at what other countries and a group of countries are currently doing, and see if we can improve the way that we do things and emulating them when they do better than we do. And also as participating in group and where we are more, we have more innovative approaches to also be able to serve as a model in those areas.
Thanks, Ghilaine. That's good to hear, and I think one of the strengths of the new organization is going to be the connections internationally that then get to be brought back into the new organization and shared among the research software, advanced research computing, and data management components or elements of the new organization. And I think there's real strength in that. I know that there's been a lot of cross-pollination within the data management world with advanced research computing, with Further being a good example of that, but there are others. So thanks for that. I'm looking at the chat and it is sitting semi-idle. Again, people, if you want to raise your hand using the features of the software of Zoom, you can be unmuted and pose your question directly.
We do have a question from James, so I'm just going to read that out. Given that the release of the tri-agency RDM policy will be delayed now, possibly by months, is NDRIO considering how and what types of support will be helpful or possible to provide to institutions as they develop and implement their institutional RDM strategies, understanding that these will be required within 1 year of the release of the tri-agency policy?
Well, that's certainly a big focus of the planning of Carl Portage and RDC, and all the discussions that we're having are certainly consider this as a kind of crucial element of that we need to consider in establishing new services and new support. I think that Jeff, that has worked intensively in the planning of the next year for Portage, can give more detail around that. Jeff?
Yes, certainly. And I think the asker of the question, I think, is probably as aware of the answer as anyone, but I think it's a good question nonetheless for everyone to hear the answer to. And that is that, yes, we are continuing to look at a multitude of ways to try and reach out to people to help them with their institutional strategies. one of the interesting questions that I've got with respect to the NDRIO that feeds into this is, in the short term, we'll be doing training and outreach in the context of, I'll say, more a purely data management realm. And we'll be looking for ways to help institutions through various means, through webinars, through virtual outreach to individual institutions or groups of institutions, to help with the development of institutional RDM strategies using the soon to be released version 2 of the institutional strategy template from Portage. So I think that's a given over the coming months. But what's really interesting to me is from the training perspective, on what kind of longer term vision that NDRIO may have for these sort of intersectional activities, be they training, communication, outreach, international connections, and so on, as was already mentioned. So there's a lot of work has to happen over the next while, and I suspect that a lot of what's happening in the DM space will continue to happen over the coming year or years, and we'll just have to keep seeing how NDRIO unfolds and how we can fold some of those cross-sectional or cross-pollinating activities with them. So that may not have answered your question, James, but we can certainly chat offline further.
I'm going to be passing it over to Corey, who has a question.
Oh, hi there. Thanks very much. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to get some of these details wrong, so forgive me to start out here. But it was my understanding that, for instance, Compute Canada had a mandate where basically advanced research computing, for the most part, supported active research projects. And so things like long-term digital archiving of research data and services around research data preservation, and using some of that ARC infrastructure for services that sort of span past the life cycle of a particular research project. I'm just wondering if you see the mandate of Compute Canada in that respect changing at all in the new organization, now that sort of the RDM piece and the ARC piece are going to be living together?
I'm not sure. I'm going to be careful on how I answer this, because my understanding is currently Compute Canada does not do long-term preservation of data. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's my understanding. That certainly is something that will have to be discussed in conjunction with the TriCouncil and ICED and CFI, to make sure that if there are some requirements that come out of TriCouncil to put in place those long-term preservation of data, that NDRIO will be able to support them. So that's an evolving need, I would say, but to my knowledge, and as I said, I may be wrong, at this point, there's no significant effort on the preservation side in Compute Canada's activities. So
yeah, Corey, an excellent question, and one that warrants more thought and action. I can say that under the current statement of work that we have under the Canary funding that runs out to the end of September, one of our actions or activities is working on a preservation workflow that would see data that's been deposited into FERDR, processed for preservation, and then put into, I'll say Compute Canada storage, but basically it's one of the nodes. It's at SciNet at University of Toronto, I believe, is who we're working with on that. And that would be sort of a staging area for movement into longer term preservation. But I think it's a moving target right now. The long-term preservation of research data is something that we're all mulling over, and as sort of the returning member of and chair of the preservation expert group, you'll know this as well as anyone, that we have lots of work in front of us. And I'm just going to jump in with another question, that sort of related to the Canary funding and such that I just mentioned. one of the questions was, it said it looks like there could be a gap in Portage funding. Is there a plan for this? And I would suggest to you that there isn't a gap. What there is, in fact, is an overlap of funding. We are, as of April 1st, literally and financially under two sources of funding. We have funding from Canary that runs out at the end of September. And as of April 1st, we have funding from NDRIO that runs out in March of 2021. So we're in fact receiving funds. They're not overlapping in terms of the statements of work. There's independence of the two areas in a sense. There are activities happening between now and October 1st under Canary's funding, and then other activities that are happening under NDRIO funding. And then after October 1st, we'll all be fully completely under NDRIO funding. So if that helps, and if you want more on that, I can certainly provide that to the person who asked the question. Can certainly reach out to me, and I can show a slide that would describe that. It was presented last week.
It looks like we also have a question from Ernie. Ernie, I've unmuted you if you'd like to follow up with that.
Hi, am I on? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hi, Ernie.
No, in Ghileine's presentation, she made reference to hosts and regions. I mean, I know what Canada's regions are. Are hosts thing like further hosts or something like that? Is that what is that what was meant?
No, we're really talking about the 5 sites that host the ARC infrastructure. So
Okay.
Simon Fraser, University of Victoria, University of Toronto, University of Waterloo, and McGill University.
Great. Okay. If I'm still on, one more question. What kind of changes, or what's the evolution of Portage to the new organization look like? What I know that there's been some discussion of that. Is there any idea on what the implications of that are for some of the planning groups and so on that are going on, and particularly the institutional strategy and kind of the computer science, data science training that's being talked about and so on? Any clues on how Portage might change, and in particular whether there will be perhaps more input from the researcher side of things, because we're targeting them, but so far they've been rather silent.
Yeah. So here again, I can't get into a lot of details because this is currently being worked out. One of the things that we've started to do, and we were talking about work groups and things like that, we're starting to look at how we're going to harmonize the different working groups that exist currently under RDC on the Canary side, and groups that are under Portage, to make sure that we harmonize that and that we create something that's more integrated in the future. So that's one thing. We are also working on updating the different, the position paper that was done in 2017, but also using the different work plans that are currently being either out of RDC or out of Portage. There again, to kind of gradually work together so that we can harmonize and work towards the moment where all of that will be integrated under NDRIO. So as Jeff mentioned, we have a working group currently where Mark Leggett from RDC, Jeff, Shahira Kher, that has been seconded to the new organization, and myself are working on that and gradually putting in place different mechanisms that will permit that kind of integration. Of course, there will be consultation rounds with the different stakeholders to make sure that what we arrive at in terms of the integration plan makes sense to the community, and make sure that the contribution that's currently being done by members of the community are still have their place and are still happening. So it's a work in progress. As we said, we want the integration to be fully done for Portage within the new organization for March 31st, 2021. So we're working towards that, and there will certainly be some consulting rounds at the beginning of the fall around that.
Okay, and just to follow up quickly, Mark Leggett, Susan Haig, Lee Wilson, Ghilaine, and I spent a day, and Kathleen O'Hare from Portage spent a day in a Zoom meeting. And if you've ever spent a day in a Zoom meeting, you'll know it's not something you take on lightly, but we managed. And we did come up with at least a preliminary look of what the expert group, working group, committees and structure, as well as a little bit on governance of how data management might look. But all of this has to be taken in the context of the work that the board has to do in developing a longer term strategic plan. So we're putting things in place that we think make sense, and we'll just see how that plays out. One of the things, Ernie, responding to your question was how we bring in researchers. Well, I would argue that one of the strengths of some of the committees that Research Data Canada's had has been the presence of more than just data specialists, but actually researchers on their various committees. And so we've really strived, we've already made progress at getting researchers onto some of our committees, and the Data Repositories Expert Group is an example of that, with a number of researcher components to that. But we're also looking at the HQP, the highly qualified people that are sitting on our various committees, and making sure that we retain them and migrate them to whatever the new structure looks like.
So I'm sorry, but I have to leave because I have a meeting at 3. So
All right.
anybody else that had questions that they didn't have the opportunity to ask can send me their question, and I'll answer as fast as I can.
And Ghilaine, we want to all express our thanks for your taking the time today to do back-to-back sessions Anglais, Français, Anglais. We really appreciate it, and we'll be talking soon, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
And over to you, Melanie, if you want to wrap up and let people know where we're going from here.
Sure. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. We will be sending out a recording of today's session along with a survey, so we hope that you'll complete that. Thank you again all for attending, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.